Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, like the video, and if you enjoyed the story, leave a comment on if you would want more. This fan fiction was not created by me, but in the description there is a link to the fanfic so you can show your support to the creator and read along. Without any more delay, let's dive into the story.
Eyes the color of slate peered over steeped fingers, silently regarding the three children in front of him. No, he corrected himself internally, though his thoughts were clouded. They're far from children now. Even now, the three sets of eyes staring at the ground in front of them were shadowed. Haunted even. It was never a look that should belong on those their age. He knew without looking in a mirror that his eyes held the same quality. It wasn't every day you learned you had lost a son. Unbidden, a lone tear left Sarutobi's right eye. It was quickly removed faster than the eye could blink. He couldn't allow himself to show emotion, not here, not now. He was Hokage. He had troops to lead. The oppressive silence that hung in the Hokage's office after Naruto had related Team 10's tale could have been cut with a kunai. A single sigh escaped the Sandaime, the quiet exclamation being almost deafening in the circular office. "Is that all?" he questioned quietly, voice held steady by an unfathomable force of will. Nods from 2/3 of the team greeted him, while Naruto spoke, "Yes, Hokage-sama." His voice was nearly monotonous, lacking inflection and devoid of emotion. Not for the first time that day did Sarutobi wish to have the smiling, never-ending ball of energy that had once been Uzumaki Naruto back. Despite coping with his own grief over the news of his son's demise, the old man couldn't help but be saddened by the loss of innocence that these shinobi, children, really, had suffered. Naruto especially. Both of his teammates had families to go home to, people to help them cope with the loss of a sensei. Naruto had no one. At one time, he might have had the Sandaime to go to with his problems, but he had voluntarily distanced himself from the Hokage years before. That, however, was likely for the best. Naruto would need to be able to handle his own problems down the road, and he wouldn't always have the aged Hokage's protection. Even if he did, Sarutobi likely wouldn't have been much of a help to the boy, given that he himself was having to cope with the loss of his second son in silence. Not for the first time, Sarutobi reflected on his position. The Hokage's hat truly is a curse, he lamented. In a world where coincidences were heralded as myth, the sad state of affairs that was the Hokage's position could only be considered one. Over time, all the families and clans who had held the seat of Hokage had been whittled down to one. Sarutobi's wayward student was the last of the once great Senju clan, its patriarchs the very founding fathers of the village he now watched over. The last in. The Namake's line, once proud, though small and unheralded until the Yondaime made his mark on the world, sat in front of him, his voice betraying nothing. Sarutobi himself had outlived his wife, his first son, and now his second. He would be damned before he outlived his grandson. A single, solemn nod served as Team 10's dismissal, and the three made for the wooden double doors that led to the rest of the administrative building. "Naruto," the Sandaime called. His voice served to halt the whole team in their tracks. The boy in question turned to regard him, face still expressionless. "I would like a word." The blonde nodded before turning to his teammates, both of whom looked at him expectantly. "Go on. I'll catch up with you later." The other two genin departed without a word, taking his direction without question. "Hokage-sama," the boy asked, clearly puzzled though he didn't show it. "Sit down, Naruto-kun." The boy did as ordered. A weary sigh escaped the aged leader once more, and Naruto couldn't help but notice how frail the old man looked. For all of his life, the Sandaime had been a larger-than-life figure, thanks in no small part to the role the man had played in his own upbringing. Now though, he looked like just another elderly man, weathered and made weary by the passage of time around him. Without warning, a cat-masked ANBU appeared from nowhere, materializing in between the Hokage and Naruto without a word. A single scroll was placed on Sarutobi's desk, and the man disappeared just as suddenly as he had come, a slight nod being all the prompting he had needed. Naruto blinked as the man disappeared. Crisp, clean, and professional. The boy gave an absent nod in acknowledgement. Right on time, as always, the Hokage remarked, seemingly pleased with the ANBU, though his face remained set in stone. Naruto silently marveled at the emotional control the man had. He had just learned that his son was dead not 30 minutes ago, and he was functioning almost as if it was business as usual. The only evidence of his emotional turmoil was the weariness of his expression, and the genin had little doubt that it could be hidden if the man so chose. The scroll was pushed to the side, and the old man turned his attention to Naruto. "I'd ask you how you are feeling, but I know from experience that that is not a question anyone wishes to answer when they're grieving." Naruto almost smiled in response to the not quite a question. He knew exactly what the Sandaime was asking. "I'm dealing with it," he began hesitantly, somewhat unsure of his own feelings on the matter. For the entirety of Team 10's journey from Wave, he had been doing his best not to think about his dead sensei, only succeeding in doing the exact opposite. It hadn't helped that he had literally been carrying the man's body in his backpack. Naruto had been more than relieved to pass it off to the ANBU squad that had met and escorted them the last 10 miles back to Konoha. Over and over again on the way back to the village, Asuma's advice about how to deal with his situation with his level of power played out in his mind. "You'd do well to stop dwelling on it," Asuma began. "There's not much you can change about your situation in regards to other ninja, so you can only focus on getting yourself better." Though mostly unrelated, the same principle applied to his situation now. Asuma was dead, no matter how painful it was to have to acknowledge it, and there was absolutely nothing that he could do about it now. However callous it was, Naruto knew that there was little use in dwelling on it. As much as he hated to admit it, there was little more that he could have done on the bridge in order to help his sensei. Yes, he could have better restrained Haku, he knew that he wouldn't be making that mistake again, but there was little else. Missions went to hell all the time, events spiraling out of control faster than a person could blink. More often than not, people ended up dead because of small details that no one had any right to expect would mean anything, and the survivors were left to pick up the pieces. Frankly, if he was honest with himself, the thing that he was most upset with was the fact that he was managing to move on so quickly. He had accepted quickly that there was little he could have done to save Asuma, and dwelling on it now accomplished nothing. It was this almost calm acceptance that disturbed him. Naruto had never lost anyone close to him before, he hadn't had anyone to really lose, and he knew that most people were almost inconsolable when they lost a loved one. He felt detached from it all. Once the initial pain had faded somewhere between Wave and Konoha, and it scared him. Despite his recent dealings with the demon in his stomach, he still maintained his fear of someday becoming like the monster. Unfeeling acceptance of the death of someone he cared about was straying close to his mental danger zone, much like detached killing. There was no doubt that he'd miss Asuma, but he wasn't about to start weeping again. It seemed unnatural, and he didn't like it. "I'm dealing with it," Naruto said resolutely once more. The Sandaime regarded him carefully, scrutinizing his face with a penetrating gaze, before offering Naruto his own nod. The loss of one's sensei is never easy to deal with. Naruto realized that the old man was speaking from experience, and we can only move forward, doing our best to live how they would have wanted us to. The Sandaime glanced out the window and over his village. "I called you back for a few reasons." Slate eyes locked with blue, now grayer than they had once been. "Firstly, I want you to know that I don't hold you accountable for what happened. Such things happen on missions far more than I would like, but I have little doubt that the events that transpired were out of your control." Naruto leaned back in his chair, relieved despite himself. The notion that the Sandaime might blame him for his son's death had occurred to Naruto, but he hadn't paid it much heed, so wrapped up he was in his own mental turmoil. There was no doubt that the Hokage could have laid the blame at his feet. That he didn't had lifted an unknown burden from his shoulders. "Secondly, I would offer you a warning," the Hokage said. The man's face was as serious as it had been the night Naruto learned of his tenant, and the blonde had little doubt about what this would be about. "Ah. You spoke freely about how you channeled the Kyuubi's chakra in the battle between yourself and Zabuza," the old man spoke. "Despite the obvious boons the power offers you, be cautious with its use. I doubt I need to warn you about the detrimental effects the chakra can have on your body." "Yes, Hokage-sama," Naruto said, his innermost thoughts in uproar as he fought the urge to tell the man about his deal with the fox. For obvious reasons, he had left the details of his conversation with the demon out of his report, and he now struggled with the idea of withholding information from the Hokage. Naruto had no doubt that the Hokage would find a way to seal off the beast from Naruto completely, for his own good of course. He couldn't allow for that to happen. That power was to be his trump card, and he wasn't about to let it go. Not only would it help save his own life down the road, but it would be invaluable if he ever encountered an enemy far enough beyond his own skill level. The lives of his team may depend on him, like they had on the bridge, and he would be damned if he let them die like Asuma had. So he kept his silence. Thirdly, is this scroll. The old man gestured to the parchment that had been dropped off by the cat-masked Anbu. Naruto blinked as the Hokage unfurled it without flourish, letting the seals inscribed on it be shown. A storage scroll? Naruto wondered. Why would an Anbu interrupt a meeting of the Hokage simply to drop off a simple storage scroll? Even as the question passed through his mind, the answer came unbidden to him. The Hokage confirmed it not a moment later. These are personal effects retrieved from Asuma. The Hokage finally betrayed some emotion as his son's personal effects were laid in front of him, his voice breaking ever so slightly. The hitch was gone almost as soon as it had arrived, repressed by an iron will born of decades of hard choices and emotional turmoil. Naruto felt his already enormous respect for the old man go up, even as raw emotions played out in his psyche. The Hokage bit his thumb and pressed it to the first of the storage seals inscribed on the scroll. A slight application of chakra and a puff of smoke heralded the appearance of Asuma's famous trench knives. Naruto stared down at his sensei's signature weapons, somewhat surprised to see them there, though he had been expecting them. "May I?" he asked quietly. Asuma had been rather anal about who touched his favorite blades, and Naruto had only gotten his hands on them twice before. The Hokage nodded with a slight smile. "Of course, they're yours now." At Naruto's startled look, Sarutobi nodded, the smile still playing across his face. "Oh yes." Naruto was unsure of how to respond. He had never even imagined that he would receive the prized knuckle knives his sensei had been so proud of. He had thought they would go to the Hokage, or at the least reserved for Asuma's nephew, Sarutobi Konohamaru. But he began, only to trail off. He didn't quite know how to phrase his confusion, and it wasn't like he didn't want the knives. Quite the contrary, really. He just wasn't used to receiving gifts, of any sort. The Hokage shrugged with a sigh. "I certainly have no use for them, Naruto-kun, and my grandson doesn't have the patience to learn my son's art. I'm sure Asuma would have wanted for you to have them, rather than have them gather dust in my estate as some token memento." Naruto almost chuckled. That sounded like something his sensei would have said. Now that he was actively listening for it, he could see where Asuma had gotten some of his speech patterns, though he doubted the man would have ever admitted it. He still felt awkward about receiving the knives, but he wasn't about to fight it. Asuma had been training him in the wielding of double blades for months. He wasn't about to turn down the opportunity to use such high-quality blades, regardless of how it came to be. As long as the old man was okay with it, he would be too. It would be like keeping a piece of his sensei with him at all times. The thought almost brought a chuckle to his lips. God, I'm such a fucking sap. Naruto reached forward confidently, grasping the twin blades in both hands, fingers coiling around the weathered leather that cushioned the handles. Unbidden, he felt his chakra begin to seep into the blades. A quick moment of concentration later, his chakra was changed to wind, and identical 3-foot, nigh invisible blades had sprung from the knives. Impressive, Sarutobi praised. And it was, such high-level elemental manipulation was almost unheard of in genin. It appears you weren't exaggerating when you said he had talent, Asuma-kun. Truly, his son's favored student had far more skill than Sarutobi had originally given him credit for. The Hokage took all reports with a healthy grain of salt. It was a pleasant surprise on a day filled with naught but sorrow. Without saying a word, Naruto retracted the wind chakra, idly noticing how much easier it was to do on specially designed blades, rather than common kunai. He pocketed the knives in silence, making a mental note to have a holster made for them. Asuma had had them clipped to his belt at all times, but Naruto didn't wish to have them hanging out in the open. "Is there anything else?" Naruto asked numbly, for that was the best way to describe his voice. The boy thought he might have caught a small grimace on the Hokage's face, but it was gone far too fast to properly tell. From my son, there is not, Sarutobi said. He applied another small burst of chakra to the open scroll on the desk. From Konoha and Kirigakure, there is. Naruto raised an eyebrow in confusion, though he knew of what the Hokage spoke. Against what he would have liked, he would have preferred to simply burn the bodies. The corpses of Zabuza and Haku had been sealed in scrolls, much like Asuma's, in order to be brought back to Konoha. Surprisingly, though perhaps not so much, considering his family greatly populated the Hunter Nin Corps, Kiba had come up with the idea, stating that both money and secrets could be obtained from the bodies of dead ninja. Both Naruto and Ino had wanted no part of ferrying the bodies of their sensei's killers back to Konoha, but had eventually been swayed by the logic that they might as well make a profit off of their dead enemies. It was cold, but Naruto could think of nothing more fitting than having Zabuza's body diced up and its secrets unlocked. The only issue was the Zabuza's head, the remnants of it being naught but paste that had been cleaned off the bridge by Tezuna's workers. To the best of his knowledge, one could only claim the bounty of a person if they had incontrovertible proof of the kill. The head was not the only way, but the easiest and most common way of doing so. With the head gone, it became far more difficult to identify the body, and, despite the Hokage not doubting Naruto, the boy thought Kiri might be a tad more skeptical of a genin killing a feared jonin. Ah! The thought struck him like a sledgehammer. The sword, was all he said. Sarutobi nodded, not stating outright but looking pleased with Naruto's quick deduction. Indeed. The Kiri no Shinobigatana Shishininshu were as renowned for their signature blades as they were for their shinobi skills and brutality. The only way the Miss Seven would have relinquished one of their blades was, and is, in death, Sarutobi said, voice hard. He had a healthy respect and dislike for what had once been one of the most influential shinobi organizations on the continent. That one of its members had killed his last son had only heightened both aspects of his opinion. Kobakirabocho will serve as all the proof Kirigakure will need of Zabuza's death. Naruto nodded hesitantly, digesting the information with a grimace and just a touch of pride. Regardless of the circumstances, he had managed to kill a famous ninja, a jonin. A smirk that was entirely inappropriate, given the situation, threatened to break across his face. He might even get a spot in one of Kiri's bingo books. The thought very much appealed to the childish, attention-seeking side of him that had dominated his psyche when he had been younger. Beyond that, however, laid vindication of the sweetest sort. Until your names appear in my bingo book, you're not real shinobi in my mind. Who's the real shinobi now, Zabuza? Naruto thought with relish. With Zabuza's death confirmed, Naruto would likely take a spot in that very bingo book the demon of the mist has held in such high esteem. The appropriate sum will be deposited in your account, the Hokage was saying, unaware of Naruto's inner thoughts. The price on the boy's head, while far lower than the one on his master's, will be supplemented by the amount Konoha pays for new bloodlines and information about them. It will be at a reduced rate, of course, as the boy is dead, and split among your team. Naruto nodded absently, inwardly thanking Kiba to the heavens for the financial windfall he was about to experience. It wouldn't bring Asuma back, but it was nice to have either way. The Sandaime sighed for what seemed like the 100th time that day. Lastly, Naruto-kun, I wish for you to know that my door is always open to you. Should you have any questions, about anything, please do not hesitate in asking me. Naruto nodded once more, this time with a small smile on his face. Thank you, Hokage-sama. A silence hung in the air for a few moments, before Naruto stood fluidly. He was inwardly pleased with the meeting, despite its source. There was no doubt in his mind that Asuma's death would weigh heavily on him for some time, but there was no use in dwelling on it. He would do as the Sandaime said, doing his best to live as Asuma would have wanted him to. He would protect his home. With no prompting necessary, Naruto gave a low bow to the Hokage, and exited the office. Sarutobi watched the boy leave with a contemplative expression. A small smile graced his features finally, seeing the resolve formed in the boy through his eyes. The boy still had a heart despite the hardship he had gone through as a boy. Thoughts of his dead son filled his mind for a single moment before being shunted to the side once more. He would have time to grieve after one last bit of business. A single hand seal was formed, and Sarutobi only had to wait 5 full seconds before the cat mask Anbu from before materialized from the floor in front of him. Hokage-sama? Hiruzen waved a hand. At ease. The man stood fluidly, posture relaxed though still at attention. Sarutobi almost smiled at the crisp professionalism. Kakashi trained him well, he mused. Remove your mask, Tenzo, I have a new assignment for you. // Naruto had learned from a young age that the cosmos, the heavens to some, the gods to others, cared little for the day-to-day affairs of men. Whoever had created the universe had certainly left it to its own devices, and didn't bother with any one man, no matter how many religious sects argued otherwise. It was for this reason that Naruto didn't bat an eye at the bright sun beating down on the back of his head and neck, while many black-clad figures at the funeral seemed to regard the weather with resentment. His own teammates could be included in that, as more than once he had caught both Kiba and Ino sneaking a glare upwards, almost as if they thought the weather was mocking them and their loss. Naruto knew better. Whatever higher power that existed didn't care when one man died. It certainly hadn't cared for a lonely orphan growing up oppressed by a disgruntled populace. A glance to his left heralded a stone-faced Kiba, the dog ninja in a desperate struggle with himself to hold in whatever tears he had. A glance to his right showed Ino, who had lost that same struggle, tear tracks lining her face as the Sandaime made the eulogy. For some, it was a cherished friend taken from our midst. For others, it was a comrade in arms. I myself lost a son, my grandson, and uncle, while 3 of our brightest young flames lost their sensei. Naruto steeled himself, forcing his body not to shift an iota as he felt the gaze of at least 100 people bore into his back. Such were the perils of being at the front of the procession. He and his team were given the honor of standing at the front, next to Sarutobi Konohamaru and many of the Sandaime's personal associates. The 3 of them had each been offered the chance to speak, but each had turned it down. Kiba and Ino had been worried about speaking in front of a huge crowd, both not confident in doing their sensei justice. Naruto's reservations had been similar, though he was more preoccupied with thoughts of how a crowd of 200 people, many of them civilians, would react to his presence up on the podium. He knew that no one would try anything, but he didn't particularly feel like fielding the no doubt massive amount of glares that would come with his speech. He had enough to deal with on a regular basis anyway. That was one result of the botched mission to Wave Country that Naruto just couldn't get over. While there was scarcely a good anything that came from that mission, the villagers' attitude toward him had only gotten even more ridiculous. He hadn't been liked before, but the vast majority had ignored him in favor of doing far more useful and productive things, like living their lives. Now, though, it seemed like things were back to how they were in his pranking days. He couldn't walk down a street without having to deal with the resentment of at least a dozen different people. They, somehow, managed to blame him for the death of Asuma, one of the most respected jonin in the village and the Sandaime's son. He supposed that it shouldn't have really come as a surprise. Any bad outcome that happened on any mission he happened to be a part of would inevitably reflect back on him, if only because of the Kyuubi. Heavens forbid that blame actually fall on the guilty party, Zabuza in this case. While Naruto had played a small part in the Asuma's death, by failing to properly restrain Haku, the Sandaime had managed to forgive the boy his mistake, and that was all that was needed in Naruto's mind. The rest of the world meant nothing if Sarutobi didn't hold the genin accountable, general will of the populace be damned. Still, he would miss being an almost non-entity in the village, as he had been before the news of Asuma's death had been made public. With the reversion of his pranking, most of the villagers had stopped paying attention to the blonde, opting to give him wide berths and nothing more. Now, they were all back to their old, charming selves. A scowl crossed his face at the remembrance of the many harsh looks he had been receiving recently. He had made a promise to himself and to the Sandaime to live how Asuma would have wanted him to, and his sensei would have wanted him to protect the village he himself had served and died for. Already, that goal was becoming far harder in Naruto's mind. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on the boy. For the majority of his pre-10 years, he had done everything in his power to have the people of Konoha notice him, for better or worse. Now, all he wanted was quiet anonymity. Sometime between the spaces of his thoughts, the Sandaime had finished with his speech, and the crowd was making its way to the casket to pay their final respects to the fallen Jonin before the body was incinerated. Having been caught up in his thoughts, Naruto missed his cue to move, and had to hurry to catch the procession. As he moved, his eyes caught the obsidian pupils of his first friend, Sasuke, and the rest of the rookie genin teams having come to pay their respects, and the boy offered him a nod of respect. Naruto returned it quickly, though a bit hesitantly. He could safely say that he could finally understand where Sasuke was coming from with his thought of revenge toward his brother. He might never have the red-hot rage that Sasuke held toward Uchiha Itachi. His rage had died with Zabuza and Gato, replaced by a cold anger directed more at the situation than anything else, but he could completely sympathize with the would-be avenger. The need to see Zabuza dead had brought on Naruto's Kyuubi-induced rage. The stray thought of what might have become of Uchiha Itachi had Sasuke been unfortunate enough to bear the Kyuubi struck him as he grasped a white rose from the pile. Naruto doubted that there would be much left of the nuke Nin. The thought was banished as quickly as it had come. Pull yourself together, Naruto, you're at a goddamn funeral, he thought viciously. And yet, despite being at the funeral of the man who had been his sensei, friend, mentor, and the closest thing to a father figure he would probably ever have, Naruto couldn't bring himself to share the same melancholy as the rest of the procession. There was no doubt that he would miss his sensei, but he had come to terms with the fact that Asuma had died on his own terms, despite its abruptness. He had willingly put himself at risk for the people of Wave, and he had paid for it. Death was a shinobi's constant companion, never more than a step or two behind, and always waiting to lay a hand on your shoulder. All thoughts fled Naruto's mind as he finally came face to face with his sensei for the final time. The head had been stitched back to the neck, and all traces of blood and wounds had been removed by the medical examiner. It was standard protocol, so that the friends and family of the deceased could view their loved one for the last time before the body was cremated in order to preserve secrets. Black hair had been slicked back, the goatee, somewhat scraggly in life, had been clipped and trimmed, and the standard Hitayate had been polished to a glistening shine. His flak vest had been replaced with a new one, as had the sash of the 12 elite guardians, along with the rest of his clothes. The only things missing were the trench knives he had been known for so well, and his customary cigarette. It was crisp, clean, professional, altogether very nice, and not at all like Asuma had been in life. Though Naruto had accepted and come to terms with his sensei's death, seeing the man's corpse touched up and put on display was like a slap to the face and a punch to the stomach. It wasn't his sensei lying in that casket. It was just a body. The blonde spared the corpse one last glance as he dropped his flower onto the top of the pile unceremoniously, walking briskly off the raised platform. He passed a few people slowly making their way back to their seats or to places unknown, bumping past them without a care for decorum. A hand on his right shoulder halted him in his tracks, and he turned abruptly, right hand slapping to his hip in a gesture that would have left a kunai in his hand had he been wearing his holster. As it was, he stilled his impulse to lash out at the offender as he came face to face with a pair of crimson eyes that reminded him oh so much of him. For all his bravado, Naruto never looked directly into Sasuke's eyes during their spars, for fear of flashing back to that night. Where the last Uchiha held nothing but rage toward his elder brother, Naruto held fear. The fear of a man whose power had brought a once mighty clan to its death and had held him helpless effortlessly. A power that was, at its very core, built around crimson pupils. But then, these weren't his eyes. They were softer, far softer, and held a compassion and empathy Naruto didn't think Uchiha Itachi had ever been capable of. Belatedly, Naruto realized that Yuhi Kurenai was speaking. As much as I know you don't wish to hear it. They're all that I can offer you, Uzumaki-san, as well as an ear if you need one, she said, her voice a whisper while they were still in hearing range of the funeral. Naruto nodded somewhat absently. Thank you, but I wouldn't want to waste your time, was all he managed. He wasn't entirely sure of what to say. It wasn't helped by the fact he had missed half of her statement. A soft smile greeted the genin, and Naruto felt himself blushing a bit in spite of himself. Yuhi Kurenai was stunning. Of course, Uzumaki-san. Naruto, please. Naruto-san then. The Jonin paused for a moment, her eyes appraising. But I'm sure that I could do far worse for company. Asuma always said as much. He was proud of you, all of you, really, but you most of all. Naruto scratched the back of his head in embarrassment, the boy feeling awkward with the situation now more than ever. He wasn't used to overt praise, especially from a Jonin. Becoming a decent person isn't easy with your background, he said, but you managed it. The woman locked eyes with him knowingly. Rising above our personal demons is never easy, especially the way you were forced to grow up. He was proud to say that you were someone he would trust with both his own life and those of the villagers, despite your past. The word demon struck Naruto like a hammer blow, and he lowered his eyes, not able to meet the crimson pupils of his sensei's friend. Guilt the likes of which Naruto hadn't felt before twisted his gut like a bayonet. Not 15 minutes ago he had been disparaging the lives of the very people Asuma had sworn to protect, and the people whose lives were now entrusted to Naruto in his stead. He forced it down, however, and spoke once more. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. The Jonin regarded him silently for a moment. "Because you should hear it. Asuma wasn't always one for direct praise, and you deserve to know what he thought of you." Naruto nodded. What was he to you?" he asked, glimpses of a conversation with Ino and Kiba coming back to him. For all he knew, she had lost as much as he had. Kurenai stopped still for a second, before composing herself with barely visible effort. "We were friends, I suppose." She sighed. "Perhaps something more someday, but just friends really." "Ah." Naruto trailed off, not sure at all how to respond. She had lost as much as him, though she concealed it well. He had always been good at reading body language, and hers was screaming discomfort at him. While it could have just been the topic, the fact that she, a Jonin, showed enough body language for Naruto to pick up on it hinted at something more. She and Asuma had been more than friends, whether it had been official or not, whether she would admit it or not. "Thank you, Kurenai-sensei," he said formally, bringing the odd conversation to a close with a short bow. The Jonin lowered her head to him slightly. "I wish you well, Naruto-san," Kurenai said sincerely, earlier awkwardness forgotten, before turning on her heel and striding back toward the funeral and her team, raven hair swishing back and forth with every step. Naruto watched her for a few moments before making his own exit, though moving in the opposite direction. The genin turned his head skyward as he made his way through the village, thoughts of Asuma, Kurenai, and his own ambitions flittering through his head as the sun warmed his face. More than anything, his thoughts remained on Kurenai's words, and the message they carried from his dead sensei. He had known that his sensei had respected his skills, he had proven that with what? He had been teaching the 12-year-old genin, but to hear such positive words about himself wasn't something he was used to. From what the pretty Jonin had said, Asuma had trusted him out of his 3 students to carry on his legacy. Naruto knew full well that it was a legacy of selfless service to Konoha and Fire Country. That, however, was the sticking point. As much as Asuma had thought of him overcoming his demons, Naruto truly hadn't, either figuratively or literally, opting instead to push them aside to be dealt with later on. He had done so with the attitude of the villagers, and had shunted true introspective thought about his situation with the Kyuubi away in order to focus on the here and now. In his defense, he had a perfect reason to do so with the latter, but it wasn't really his style, in hindsight. For his entire life, short though it was at present, he had been a go-getter. Whether it had been through his pranks for attention, or his single-minded attitude toward training to survive the threat of Akatsuki, Naruto had always been the aggressor, the one who tried to take his problems by the horns and wrestle them to the ground. He hadn't done so with either of his personal demons. The situation with the villagers had been moved to the side in order to take a back seat to training, and Naruto had convinced himself that he didn't really care about what the general populace thought of him. Looking back, on both today and his life, he knew that this wasn't the case. Their attitude, their intransigence toward anything regarding him grated on him like nothing else. That had to change. Or at least, he had to find a way to deal with it so it wouldn't interfere with his duty. If Asuma had entrusted him with his legacy of servitude to the village, personal feelings couldn't matter. As a shinobi, and as a Suma student, he had a duty to serve, and he'd be damned if he didn't follow through on that. That was a promise, and Naruto never broke his promises. The Kyuubi issue was something else entirely, and something that Naruto would have to think long and hard on in order to deal with properly. He had no intention of giving up the power the demon had laid at his disposal, but he'd have to find a way to train and use it appropriately. Getting his friends killed because he was relying on instinct to use the chakra was something he wouldn't allow to happen, no matter the results on Tazuna's bridge. You took your time. The sudden voice told Naruto he had reached his destination. He had been so caught up in his thoughts that he hadn't noticed. Got sidetracked, was all he offered in return. He stared down the stern face of his female teammate until she broke eye contact, electing to turn her gaze to the black, kunai-shaped slab of stone that served as Konoha's memorial to those who had fallen in battle. So, the girl asked him. It was Kiba, sprawled in the grass beside the blonde duo, who answered, "So what? We're here, right?" Naruto didn't bother to raise an eyebrow. You sound like you don't want to be. The dog ninja shrugged, sitting up to stare down his teammates. Personally, this doesn't seem like something Sensei would want us to do. We've been over this, Kiba, Ino lectured. This is our memorial, no one else's. Kiba just shrugged. Whatever. I just don't think he'd approve of us moping around for a day. He's dead now, Kiba, Ino said harshly. What he would want doesn't matter. Her voice trailed off a bit at the end, cracking as the girl fought back a sob. Naruto pulled the girl into a quick hug. She buried herself in his arms as she finally allowed herself to break down, tears falling freely from her eyes and shuddering sobs racking her body. He is dead, Ino, and that's why we're doing this. Once, Naruto soothed. Just this once, we're allowed to mope and mourn, and then we have to move on like he'd want us to. Ino's response was to cry harder, wrapping her arms around the blonde genin even harder. Even Kiba, normally boisterous, was depressed, his own tears starting to leak from his eyes. Only Naruto didn't cry, though he held back more than a few sobs as his teammates broke down. Finally, the group's tears were spent, and Team 10 lay sprawled on the well-manicured grass around the centigraph. Naruto was the first to rise, pulling Ino and Kiba with him by the arms as he strode forward, finally taking in the full sight of the memorial stone. The name Sarutobi Asuma was engraved at the very bottom, as the last name on the stone erected for Konoha's heroes. Naruto reached into the back pocket of his black funeral attire, withdrawing a plain white, rectangular box. You found them? Ino asked. Naruto nodded as he opened the box and passed a plain white cigarette to both Ino and Kiba. Yeah. They're expensive as hell. The genin withdrew a square metal lighter from the same pocket, clicking it open with a slide of his fingers. A small flame burst forth, and Naruto lit up the ends of Team 10 cigarettes, the three of them holding them a few inches from their faces between their fingers. To Asuma, Naruto declared. To Asuma, Ino, and Kiba chorused. All three took a simultaneous drag, and the sound of coughs filled the air around Konoha's memorial stone. // 2 weeks had been the amount of time Team 10 had been granted for leave, and he had used the time to prepare. First impressions were ridiculously important in the world of shinobi, even more so for sensei and their prospective students. Even among them, Team 10 would be a special case. A genin team that had lost its sensei was an anomaly for the greatest of the shinobi villages, and there was no doubt that Team 10 would be even more of a hassle to deal with than an average trio of cadets. After all, they had some high expectations. He took a deep breath to center himself as he settled down in the clearing. The 2 weeks he had had to prepare were strange to him. As an ANBU captain, the best at that, he was far more used to vague plans that were only truly shaped in the heat of high-level missions. He had second-guessed his testing idea more than once, before finally settling on what his gut instinct had told him to do. It had carried him through years of service to the Hokage. It wouldn't fail him in front of 3 rookie genin. Even so, he still made time to drop by his old captain's place for some friendly advice. He had been as surprised as anyone when he heard that the illustrious Hatake Kakashi had finally decided to take on a genin team, but his captain had been even more surprised when the man learned that he was going to take on students. Sarutobi Asuma's students at that. He had just laughed off his former captain's surprise. He had been far more shocked when the Hokage had given the order. Tenzo would admit to being a bit miffed at being reduced to an instructor for some fresh out of the academy brats. The heavens knew how poor most rookies were, as he'd much rather be serving his Hokage on missions. Still, the Hokage had been insistent, and had assured him that it would only be for a short duration, as at least one, if not more of the team members was a shoo-in for promotion to Chunin. That had caught Tenzo's attention, and had prompted him to do some digging through the Hokage's archives. S-rank clearance was useful to have. The results had been almost as surprising to read as his assignment had been. Inazuka Kiba had been exactly as he had suspected. The report said he was loud, brash, and arrogant, much like the rest of his feral clan. It was to be expected of the dog users, but what came as a surprise had been the boy's abilities with his clan ninjutsu. Academy records showed the boy to be third in his class in taijutsu, as well as more recent investigations showed large amounts of growth in the 3.5 months he had been under Sarutobi Asuma. His partnership with his dog was at a high level for his age, which showed a slight inkling of future potential for the Hunter Nin Corps. The Inazuka made up quite the large population of the shinobi hunters, and it looked as if the clan heir would join them. Yamanaka Ino had come as a bit of a surprise, though mostly because of the bipolarity of the reports on her. Her academy records showed above-average skill at every aspect of the shinobi lifestyle, though her attitude was noted as needing work. The girl hadn't taken her time seriously at the academy, and her teachers had noticed. That was in direct contrast to the report Sarutobi Asuma had written about the girl, calling her motivated and driven to excel. The dead Jonin spoke of high levels of improvement in her tenure under him, especially in the area of genjutsu. The idea of a genjutsu-wielding Yamanaka was a harrowing thought as, combined with their mind techniques, illusions could become all that more potent. And that left the true enigma. Uzumaki Naruto, Tenzo called across the clearing, his voice bland. The blond boy held the ANBU captain's gaze steadily, his face carefully blank as he took in the scene around him. By all rights, the clearing was a mess. The ground was torn up in multiple places, the sign of ninjutsu, while branches from nearby trees lay strewn across the grass. Chakra saturated the air and laid heavily on the blonde, who had been alerted to his presence being required at Training Ground 11 by Messenger Bird. The centerpiece, however, was the battered, bruised, and bloodied bodies of his two teammates, both lying prone at Tenzo's feet. Above them, clad in black fatigues with a matching vest and a half-mask similar to Hatake Kakashi's, stood Tenzo, ninjutsu in hand, looking for all the world like the perfect assassin. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" the boy asked, his own voice flat. Tenzo was inwardly impressed with the boy's poise. He knew of many far more seasoned ninja who would lose all sense of decorum when faced with a similar scene. On some level, the boy probably knew this was a test, but the idea that it might not be halted the boy from calling the Jonin on it. The academy records were mixed concerning the Uzumaki, the early ones being rather scathing toward the boy's supposed lack of talent and work ethic. Those had lasted a year, before being replaced with far more moderate reviews, ones that indicated substantial growth of skill, before finally settling on comments that bordered on glowing praise. Naruto had been second in his class for the last few years of his tenure, second only to Uchiha Sasuke, a reputed genius in his own right. Further digging had showed a surprising turn in the boy's training, as he had begun to study under Madogai, the experienced and powerful Jonin's limited tutelage, bringing out the latent talent the academy had failed to notice. "That's not important," the former ANBU captain answered. "The only thing that matters is that I'm following my orders." The reports his deceased sensei had written followed in a similar vein to those of the later academy years. Sarutobi wrote that the last Uzumaki showed potential befitting of a Jinchuriki, the boy possessing massive chakra reserves for his age, as well as ninjutsu talent the man felt unmatched by any of his generation, let alone his graduating class. The boy had a wind affinity, and the Jonin spoke of training in elemental ninjutsu in the last report he had written. All of that, combined with the hearsay about the genin having killed Momochi Zabuza of all people, a rumor confirmed by the Sandaime, though with significant circumstantial details included, made for quite the interesting genin. The former captain would admit to being more than a little intrigued by such a genin. And thus, Tenzo had his test. The ANBU gripped his blade ever so slightly in anticipation, and it was all the prompting Naruto needed. Though the reports had said it clearly, Tenzo was still taken aback when the boy hurled a wind chakra-sheathed kunai at him, poised to pierce him between the eyes and howling like a hurricane. That, however, wasn't the appropriate response, the Jonin thought with a little disappointment. The kunai, while quick through the air, was no match for Tenzo's speed, which would allow for him to easily land a killing blow on one, if not both of the boy's teammates. Perhaps his mind needs some exercising. The sudden absence of the sound of wind was the only indication that his initial assessment was wrong. The former ANBU captain moved faster than the boy could see, using pure speed to escape a dropping heel that would have caved his skull in. Tenzo leapt backwards out of range, his sharp eyes catching the form of the wind-enhanced kunai now buried in the ground where Naruto had first been standing. Kawarimi with a kunai, with the futon chakra used as an anchor for the jutsu to better latch onto the blade. Impressive thinking. Naruto taken his well-earned opportunity to grasp both Ino and Kiba by the collar, shunned Shinai back to where his kunai was stuck in the ground. He dropped the unconscious bodies to the ground unceremoniously, locking eyes and glaring at Tenzo from across the clearing. "So, did I pass your test?" he called, voice angry. Blue eyes bored into Tenzo's brown, and the new Jonin felt a smirk forming beneath his mask. Quick thinking on the fly and some deductive reasoning to boot. He'd likely make Chunin now if the examiners saw that last display. The genin had correctly gathered that the objective was to get his subdued teammates out of harm's way. Tenzo would even admit to being caught off guard. He would bet money that that little maneuver would kill even a Jonin, given the right timing. He, however, was no mere Jonin. One of them was his answer. Your approach was reckless, though, leaving yourself exposed to any enemies that might have been lying in wait. Naruto's eyes widened as a small spike of chakra served as his only warning. The genin deftly leapt over a slash at his legs, planting his right foot on the offender's head and pushing off out of the immediate kill zone. Landing, he watched as both of his teammates dropped their respective henges, reverting to clones of the man in black. He clicked his teeth in irritation at his slip in judgment. A mistake like that might cost him were the situation not a test. Two quick movements had his new trench knives spinning their way to his knuckles, wind chakra exploding down their length and beyond with the force of a tornado. Tenzo allowed himself a small smile. The boy was certainly eager. Who knew, maybe he'd even be pushed a little. When one test ends, another begins, Uzumaki Naruto. Prepare yourself, Tenzo spoke in monotone. You won't succeed unless you come at me with the intent to kill. When one test ends, another begins, Uzumaki Naruto, Tenzo spoke in monotone. You won't succeed unless you come at me with the intent to kill. Naruto spared the sentence one moment of thought, inwardly reflecting on how ludicrous the statement sounded, before reminding himself that this was a Jonin. He likely wouldn't be able to kill the man anyway. That wouldn't stop him from trying, however. Tenzo fought back a slight smile as he watched his charge think on the task for a moment. At least he has some common sense, the ANBU thought with satisfaction. Many rookie genin would simply charge in without a thought, either paying the order no heed or so confident in their skills they thought they could actually lay a finger on their instructor. Kakashi had told him as much had happened with his squad. The former captain knew well that it took a ninja of a certain skill to even be able to lay a finger on him were he taking the test seriously, but, just as he was no normal Jonin, Uzumaki Naruto was no normal genin. He might even sweat a little. Wind roared to life around the boy's blades as he charged at speeds beyond most his age. Tenzo gave a single nod at the tactic. Naruto correctly assumed that the little kunai trick he'd used earlier wouldn't work twice. Full frontal, however, is too simple-minded. The Jonin unsheathed his assassin's blade in less time than it took to blink, bringing the ninja to bear in a strike that would relieve Naruto of his head. The genin didn't disappoint. Showcasing his agility, Naruto came to an abrupt halt just outside the radius of Tenzo's slash, pivoting on his right foot and channeling latent momentum and chakra into a burst of speed that sent him sprinting around his new sensei in a perfect circle. Goken, Tenzo thought. The distinctive tactic was first developed by the renowned taijutsu master Madogai, though the style's creator rarely ever used the technique anymore. He was beyond such simple maneuvers. His students, however. The idea was to use pure speed to limit the enemy's sight, the sheer quickness causing the user of the technique to blur to an indistinguishable shape. With the enemy's attention split between trying to see the user, as well as trying to predict where the strike would come from, the Goken user would strike. Tenzo resheathed his blade in the exact amount of time it had taken to draw, bringing his arms up almost level with his eyes, elbows pointed outward and his center of mass lowered in what could only be described as a defensive stance. It wasn't a moment too soon, as Naruto came hurtling out of his circle directly behind the Jonin, right foot poised and body coiling into a perfect trademark Konoha Senpu. Tenzo rotated quickly, the upper part of his left arm catching the brunt of the powerful kick, hardened muscles unyielding under Naruto's assault. An involuntary wince escaped his emotionless demeanor. Even so, the boy kicked hard. Such a thing wasn't about to stop him, however, as he lashed out with a lightning-fast right-handed jab. Naruto just barely avoided it by leaning his head to the side, but the genin paid it no heed, striking with dual cross slashes of his knuckle knives as his wind chakra screamed. Tenzo leaned back to avoid the first, but had to duck under the second to avoid having his head sliced off. The Jonin used his lowered position to ram his shoulder into Naruto, though the blow lacked its normal power as Naruto had jumped backwards to right himself after his strike. It still had enough momentum to force the genin off balance, however, and Tenzo pressed his advantage, bringing his left elbow up and under Naruto's chin in a brutal strike that sent the boy reeling. Naruto recovered fast, but not fast enough to stop getting backhanded across his face by Tenzo's left hand in a continuation of the Jonin's last strike. The blonde lowered himself instinctively, growling as he tasted blood in his mouth. Tenzo nearly smirked beneath his mask as the boy raised his knife-laden hands to be level with his head, unknowingly mimicking Tenzo's own taijutsu stance. Good instincts, they'll help him learn quickly, the Jonin thought with praise. Chakra racing down his legs, igniting nerve endings, Naruto burst forward, knives poised to behead Tenzo once more. The masked man took a single step back to right himself in preparation, and Naruto took the opportunity to move into a fast-moving circle once more. This again? The boy should know better, the new Jonin thought, somewhat disappointed but still wary. Tenzo lowered himself into his defensive stance once more in expectation. Naruto wasted no time, hurtling out of the circle in another perfect Konoha Senpu, this time to Tenzo's right. The Jonin almost sighed. A quick rotation had the former ANBU captain poised for a perfect block, his left hand ready to grab the inclement kick, while the right would grasp Naruto by the neck. The tactic hadn't worked the first time, the boy had to learn never to use the same tactic twice, no matter how harsh the lesson would be. He made for the grab, only for the body of his new student to pass clean through his hands like a ghost. Bun Shin. But when did he have time, Tenzo thought with alarm and a small hint of satisfaction. So the boy was smarter than that after all. An instantaneous Kawarimi carried Tenzo outside of Naruto's circle, the substitution with his Moku Bunshin seamless as reflexes born of endless high-level missions kicked in. He reappeared some 30 yards from his new student, and turned just in time to watch the blonde obliterate his Bunshin with Futon, Rankuden at point-blank range. Wood chipped sword skyward as Tenzo studied his student. Crafty use of ninjutsu while leaving the taijutsu as a smokescreen, good instincts, and no hesitation when it comes to landing decisive blows. He either knows that he won't touch me, or he's just taking this test far more seriously than I had thought. The Jonin wasn't quite sure which option was running through Naruto's head, but he didn't much care. Both would serve his purposes here. Time for a bit of pressure. Both Yugugo and Kakashi said he needed to exercise his sadistic side a bit more. This would be a perfect opportunity. Naruto glanced through the haze of wood chips warily, mind ablaze with thought. Wood was really only used for Kawarimi by ninja, not to form clones. That this Jonin could do so hinted at a skill Naruto, like the rest of the ninja world, had thought lost with the Shodai Hokage. Could it be, he thought with uncertainty? Already, this new sensei of his was proving formidable in many ways. His mind was saved from having to try to answer the myriad of questions surrounding the Jonin when the still floating wood chips in front of him morphed into sharpened blades resembling kunai. Blue eyes widened almost comically as Naruto realized how trapped he was, before lightning-fast hand seals had wood impacting wood rather than flesh and bone courtesy of a substitution. His kawarimi left him momentarily disoriented, reflexive though it was, and the blonde shook his head a few times to clear out the cobwebs. He apparently shook his head a few too many times, as when he refocused a second later, the clearing was filled with black-clad clones of his new sensei. Naruto cursed sulfurously at the sight, before retrieving his knuckle knives with a lightning-fast swipe at his waist, futon chakra exploding down their lengths. Senses screaming, Naruto leapt backwards to avoid a hand that burst from the ground to grab his ankle. He landed lightly on the balls of his feet, but immediately was forced to sway to the side to avoid a stab from another clone. A quick weight shift had him in position for a counterattack of his own, but the appearance of yet another black-clad figure at his flank forced him to strafe to his left to make space. Belatedly realizing that he was completely encircled by the mass of black-clad clones, Naruto blurred into action as the ninja-wielding doppelgangers rushed him. Moving almost too fast for the untrained eye to catch, Naruto wove in and out of the mass of clones, avoiding their attacks with seeming ease and always by only a hair's breadth. One stab to the chest was dodged with a spin to his left. The spin led to another in the opposite direction, as Naruto planted his right foot and used his momentum to move in the complete opposite direction, neatly avoiding a slash at his neck. An idea struck him as he ducked under a punch, and he planted his hands on the ground and pushed upwards, sending his body skyward. He sheathed his unused knives in their holsters at his waist, before speeding through the hand seals of a katan jutsu he had secreted from the archive years previous, but only now had the time to practice. Just as he was about to release the grand fireball, his sight of the massive clones 10 yards below him flickered for an instant. What? He thought with alarm, before the obvious answer lodged itself in his brain. Genjutsu. None of the clones had actually touched him, each of their attacks easy enough to avoid, and he hadn't made any counterattacks due to being far too occupied with dodging the numerous swipes and slashes at his form. He had just assumed they were like the Moku Bunshin he had reduced to wood chips before. Add to that his momentary disorientation, and the conclusion was obvious. The knowledge that this was, in fact, a test of his abilities reasserted itself, and Naruto realized that it was natural for this new sensei to test his genjutsu ability. And he had failed in it spectacularly. The pent-up chakra from the Gokaki no Jutsu was growing too hot to bear, so Naruto released the grand fireball on the mass of illusionary clones with a rage-filled grunt. The fire swirled in the clearing for about 5 seconds before Naruto released the jutsu and fell back to earth, breaking his chakra flow for good measure even though the latent chakra in the air from his ninjutsu would have dispelled the genjutsu anyway. The blonde genin landed without a sound, staring down the single form left in the clearing, his form seemingly untouched by the fiery hell Naruto had unleashed on his doppelgangers. The two locked eyes for a moment, one impassive, one steaming with anger, before Tenzo was suddenly in Naruto's face before the boy had a moment to comprehend what was happening. Naruto took a punch to the face and an elbow to his ribs before he started reacting. The Jonin was fast, and he left Naruto with little time to respond to the sudden bout of violence. The genin ducked under a high elbow, only to receive an uppercut to the face that sent him reeling. It was the space made from the blow, however, that gave Naruto the precious half-second he needed to regroup, and he launched his counterattack with all the ferocity Goken embodied. His first two haymakers were blocked by Tenzo's raised forearms, hands near his head once more, but Naruto adjusted quickly. He lowered his center of mass accordingly, realizing that he wouldn't be able to land so much as a legitimate hit on the man while standing tall, and struck out with one of the lightning-fast jabs he usually reserved for when fighting with his knuckle knives. It wasn't to be. Tenzo redirected the jab with the outside of his left arm before grabbing it, using Naruto's forward momentum as leverage to rotate his body inwards to deliver a shot to Naruto's elbow. A duck under the offending appendage had Tenzo in position and the Jonin capitalized by viciously elbowing Naruto in the face, sending the genin's head snapping backwards as blood flowed from his newly bleeding lip. The black-clad man wasn't done, however, taking the opportunity to deliver an elbow to Naruto's left leg, 2 backfists to his chest, a second elbow to the right leg, before finally grasping the boy by his neck and flipping him to the ground in a brutal show of strength that had Naruto bruised, disoriented, and gasping for air as he lay still on the ground. Tenzo observed the fallen form of his charge silently for nearly a minute. The boy was recovering, slowly but surely. Air which he had gasped for seconds earlier now came in steady breaths. It was a recovery time far faster than ninja many years his senior and in their primes. Jinchuriki, those created at birth at least, are physical marvels unlike normal humans, even by shinobi standards. Tenzo showed no outward expression at the proclamation, electing to let Sarutobi continue unimpeded, though he certainly held questions. The effect of a biju's chakra on a human over time has never truly been documented, the Sandaime lectured. But snippets of information about many of the known Jinchuriki states similar observations about physical prowess in relation to their normal shinobi counterparts. They move faster, recover quicker, and, given the correct training, are far stronger than normal shinobi. And that's just physical? Tenzo asked. Sarutobi nodded. Yes. The far-reaching effects of the demon's chakra affect everything from physical recovery to chakra capacity. The Sandaime locked eyes with Tenzo. I take it you are far more versed in the more chakra-intensive effects that surround most who harbor tailed beasts? Of course, Hokage-sama. Tenzo nodded. Good. While my son. Tenzo noted how the old man didn't even flinch at the mention of his newly deceased son, not that he expected him to. Sought to enhance Naruto's ninjutsu capabilities and play to the boy's immense talent in that area, I would ask you to concentrate more on the physical, taijutsu aspects of the boy's development. Hokage-sama? Sarutobi almost smiled at the unspoken why. A Jinchuriki's body is malleable, even at an age where most normal humans stop developing, as their genetic structure and past nutrition have a set blueprint as to what the body will eventually be. While I'm not saying to break the boy's bones and reset them in certain ways, I do believe that a more physically oriented training style would benefit the boy in the long run, as it would play to the great strength he will no doubt possess one day. Tenzo frowned, the expression in full view as his mask was off. He was still uncomfortable without it at times. A new taijutsu style? Sarutobi smiled. The captain was quick like that. Along with his stellar record and unorthodox abilities, the sharp mind of a trained commander was why Sarutobi had chosen him for this job. Indeed. While Guy certainly did Naruto a favor in taking him under his wing, his Goken style is far too rigid for one not fully devoted to taijutsu. The smile morphed into a grin of satisfaction. I believe Naruto himself has come to understand this, though he has found little to do about it without proper guidance. Tenzo nodded, in thought once more before an idea struck him, one that Sarutobi had likely been after from the beginning. Shinzo Kara? He was rewarded with a grin that bordered on nostalgic. Rather fitting, no? Indeed, Hokage-sama. Though, I wonder how is he to learn such a style in such a short time? I am only to be his sensei for a short time, and even to be adept at the style takes months of training. The former ANBU captain trailed off, the answer to his question smacking him in the face even as he asked the question. At this, Sarutobi's grin became almost gleeful. The hell? Naruto had taken over a minute to fully recover from the beating he had taken, only to receive a scroll to the face as he sat up. He caught it before it reached the ground, however, and turned an appraising eye to it. Kage Bunshin, he asked aloud, reading the title. A corporal clone technique that forms a doppelganger directly from the chakra of the user, Tenzo recited from memory, having copied the information from the forbidden scroll of seals onto the scroll his charge now held. The voice of the Jonin who was to be Naruto's new sensei drew his attention from the scroll to the man, drawing a raised eyebrow from the genin. The man, formerly clad in only black, now wore the standard uniform he often saw on all of Konoha's ninja. Navy fatigues covered by a forest green flak vest were offset by the standard equipment pouches in their appropriate places. The only distinguishing feature on the man was the mask-style Hitai that Naruto knew was similar to the one worn by the Night Aim Hokage. That, and the wooden chair the man was sprawled on lazily that seemed to both grow directly from the ground and conform to every line of the man's body, almost as if it grew from him as much as it did the earth. Naruto shrugged off the sight of the dead bloodline ability, electing to save his questions for later and concentrate on the obviously important scroll. I take it I'm supposed to learn this, he stated more than asked. Why else would the man give him the scroll? Indeed. The Kage Bunshin is a B-ranked restricted technique due in part to its monstrous chakra drain on the user, Tenzo lectured. Due to your extenuating circumstances, it's been decided that you would find the technique to be a boon rather than a detriment. Naruto nodded at the indirect reference to the QB sealed within him. The chakra drain that most ninja would find instantly debilitating likely wouldn't even faze him. He broke the seal on the scroll and unfurled it without a flourish, beginning to read with rapt attention he truly only reserved for learning new ninjutsu. Tenzo watched the boy with calculating eyes the whole time. Any questions? A wry smile crossed Naruto's face, though he didn't look up. Plenty. Your name would be a good place to start. Wry amusement seemed to transfer from student to sensei, as a similar smile broke across Tenzo's unmasked face. Call me Yamato, he said simply. Naruto nodded, still absorbed in his reading, though he noted the difference in call me and my name is. Knowledge was power, indeed. ANBU then, the boy thought with some certainty. Most regular shinobi didn't have classified names, after all. He spared a second of thought to he and his team being assigned an ANBU for a sensei, before dismissing it. Nothing bad could come of intensive training, at least in his mind. He was almost finished with his reading when his eyes came to a halt above a passage about the jutsu's effects. Blue eyes met black sharply, and the newly dubbed Yamato broke into a smile. Memory and sensory transfer? Naruto asked. If this was what he thought it was. The other reason why this jutsu was classified as restricted, Yamato said. Physical training? The Jonin shook his head. Only the knowledge of it. Naruto nodded. Even without physical gains being directly transferred to the user of the technique, the Kage Bunshin was still a massive boon to his training. The amount of ninjutsu I could learn with this, hell, even taijutsu could be practiced, Naruto thought with a growing excitement. Why, he asked Yamato. A learning implement. The Hokage believes that direct training in ninjutsu is something you don't require at present, and the technique will help you break down and master any new jutsu you happen to come across, Yamato stated. The Hokage was adamant about not directly teaching Naruto any new ninjutsu besides this one. Let him find them on his own, he had said, a wry smile on his wizened visage. Taijutsu then. A satisfied smile split Yamato's face. That is what I'll be training you in for the foreseeable future, among other small things. And my team? Naruto had no idea how many points he had inadvertently won with the Jonin with his simple statement of concern for his teammates. They have been similarly tested, and will receive training tailored to their needs as well as group training. Yamato offered the boy a small smile. Rest assured, Team 10 staying together is in the interests of the Hokage, and I'm here to help you grow into a functioning and cohesive unit. Naruto nodded, shoulders sagging slightly in relief that his team would be staying together. It was an unvoiced fear of his that they would be broken up and trained separately, but it appeared that wasn't to be the case. So, Naruto trailed off. So, I shall begin your taijutsu and physical training once you've mastered the Kage Bunshin. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Any particular style, he asked dryly. Indeed, Yamato said patronizingly. Shinzo Kara, though you wouldn't have heard its name despite your familiarity with it. The genin realized he would be learning whatever style the Jonin had used so effectively against him in his test. A smile split his face at the thought of using the brutal techniques against his enemies, rather than having it used against him. Lightning fast, physically uncompromising, and viciously. Brutal? Naruto finished cheekily. You noticed, the Jonin drawled. I did. Yes, well. Yamato shifted slightly in his seat, the wood responding to his movements to provide perfect support regardless of his position. It is a seldom used style anymore, its creators having been wiped out at the start of the Second Secret Shinobi World War, but it is effective, and based solely on the intent of the user. Do you want to kill? Do you want to maim? Yamato said, gesticulating at Naruto to get his point across. ANBU style, the boy asked in reference to the many taijutsu styles that ANBU were forced to learn upon their entrance to the program. Yamato was mildly impressed with the boy's knowledge. The Sandaime did say he was good at gathering information. Yes, though it originated in what was once known as Yuzu no Kuni. The Jonin carefully gauged his charge's reaction. Specifically, from the shinobi village of Uzumaki Naruto finished for him quietly, eyes lowered at the thought of his dead ancestors. You've heard of it, Yamato stated more than asked. I can do my research, Naruto said quietly. Certain subjects motivate me to dig more than others, he finished somewhat cryptically. Yamato nodded, taking note of the change in his student's tone and mood. Maybe I should have been less blunt, he thought in retrospect. He wasn't used to dealing with children, and certainly not orphans with emotional baggage. Do you think of them often? He asked gently. He too was an orphan, and could sympathize with wanting to know about one's family. Unfortunately, he had never actually found who his was. Naruto shrugged, visibly collecting himself. He didn't like thinking about his family. Only if I can't help it. Thinking about them does me no real good, does it? Best just to move on. Yamato nodded. While jaded, especially coming from a preteen, it was a good outlook to have on life for a shinobi. There were things that you just couldn't change, and dwelling on them did no one save your enemies any good. The style? Naruto asked, eager as ever to steer the conversation back into safer waters. Safer waters that had nothing to do with his feelings about his deceased relatives. Ah, yes. Yamato shifted himself once more, and Naruto watched as the wood moved with him. It was somewhat disconcerting. Shinzo Kara, beyond standard katas that you will be learning, is truly all about being knowledgeable of your surroundings. Whether those surroundings are people, trees, weapons, doesn't matter, the Jonin lectured. Naruto got the impression that this wasn't the first time the man had made this speech. Knowledge of actions and whatever reactions you choose to implement. A defensive style? Naruto asked, as that is what such a style would be classified as. Surely not. In the way I use it, yes, Yamato confirmed. You, I suspect, will bring a more offensive-oriented mindset to the style. Naruto raised a blonde eyebrow. I wasn't aware that a mindset could be brought to a taijutsu style. Yamato shrugged. With most, more rigid styles, the mind of the user only truly affects how hard they hit, as there are only a set number of moves and katas that one can use while still conforming to the style. With Shinzo Kara, while there are certain patterns and even katas, the mindset of the user is everything. When put into practice, there is a constant choice that has to run through the user's mind. In reacting to this, do I seek to kill, or to maim, or even to not injure? Naruto nodded at the explanation. No matter what though, each option hurts. That they do, Yamato confirmed with a wry smile. Naruto settled back in thought, his eyes drifting to the open Kage Bunshin scroll. He wasn't entirely sure why he was learning this new style of taijutsu, but he wasn't going to complain about it. As much as he was comfortable with Goken, it was far too rigid for someone who wasn't completely devoted to taijutsu. He would never be so one-dimensional, at least not by choice. He had been in the beginning stages of trying to create his own taijutsu style, one far less rigid than Goken, but only the heavens knew when that might have actually happened, let alone if it would have happened. And now he had this dropping neatly into his lap, with a B-ranked clone technique that would help him everywhere thrown in as a party favor. At this point, from the viewpoint of a shinobi in training, things couldn't be better. It hardly counted as a consolation prize after losing Asuma, but it would help him move forward in the long run. So when do I start learning this stuff? He asked Yamato. A raised eyebrow met his query. When you learn that jutsu, was the answer. Naruto blinked once, grinned, and settled down into his training mindset. I'll get along with this guy just fine, he thought with satisfaction. / I don't like this guy. Naruto just rolled his eyes at the complaint that was now fast becoming Ino's most used sentence. Unfortunately, he was alone in this, as in a surprising twist of the norm, Kiba was fully backing up her claims of hating their new sensei. He really didn't see what the problem was. He voiced as much, and promptly winced at the openly hostile looks his team sent him. He rolled his eyes again, out of sight of course. Leave it to Ino and the mutt to finally agree on something, and that something being disagreeing with him. Honestly, he felt like he was on a team with children sometimes. Sensei, he called. Yamato, sitting as always in that weird chair of his, opened his eyes. Naruto didn't think for a second that the man had been sleeping. He had been thinking. A slight smirk crept up the man's face, about the only emotion the man showed on a regular basis. Ready, then? Naruto gave a single, curt nod, steeling himself. The preteen turned once to look at his two teammates, locking eyes with Kiba. The boy nodded back, though with considerably less intensity. Naruto just sighed. He'd have to have a long talk with the two of them after the session was over. It was due. Refocusing, Naruto stared down his new sensei for less than a full second, before breaking into a full-on chakra-enhanced sprint at the man. Peripheral vision degenerated to a blur as Naruto moved, true tunnel vision only staved off by an intense concentration that didn't allow the blonde to slip into Shunshin. 10 meters, 5 meters, come on, Kiba, Naruto mentally screamed. Almost 3 meters from his waiting sensei, Naruto felt the distinctive grip of chakra take hold of him for a split second, before disappearing just as quickly as it had come. Useless mutt. 2 meters from Yamato, Naruto halted the majority of his forward momentum, gripping the ground with chakra for leverage, and rotated himself into a counterclockwise spin that carried him past his waiting sensei. Feet planted, tendons screaming, Naruto came to a full stop on the other side of Yamato, arms raised to his eye level in anticipation. He wasn't disappointed. Blurring almost too fast for the genin to see, Yamato struck out with a right-handed haymaker that was blocked by Naruto's left forearm. Countless hours of clone training memories came to the fore in the blonde's mind, and he moved to grab the offending appendage and turn defense to offense. Chakra-laced fingers slipped over Yamato's retreating hand, finding just too little to grab hold of. Plan B, then. Naruto shuffle-stepped to his right, managing to neatly avoid a thrust kick from the jonin, and ducking under a follow-up that would have landed him in a nearby village. The genin lowered his center of mass before lashing out in a sweeping low kick at Yamato's legs, aiming to relieve his sensei of his balance. The former ANBU captain leapt over the leg sweep, but Naruto had expected it. Having only fractions of a second, Naruto pivoted like the wind, coiling and uncoiling faster than ever before and launching a brutal elbow at his airborne sensei with all the speed and suddenness of a snake. It connected solidly, the chakra-empowered strike launching the former ANBU back and sending him to the ground. Naruto grimaced for less than a second before, senses screaming, he turned rapidly, arms raised in his now trademarked taijutsu stance. It too proved futile, however, as Yamato occupied one of his arms with a cross-punch before spinning Naruto off balance and sending him careening across the clearing with a kick to his exposed chest. The genin landed hard, and had a moment to glance at the down and splintering form of Yamato's Moku Bunshin before grimacing in pain. That hurt. Falling back to the earth, Naruto took a leaf from Shikamaru's book and simply stared at the passing clouds for a few moments, reveling in the relative peace. It was about all he managed to get these days, in between personal and team training coupled with being Team 10's new mediator. As frustrating as it was, he was forced to admit that the earlier vitriol both Ino and Kiba had been spewing at their new sensei wasn't an isolated occurrence. It had been a sum total of 2 weeks since Yamato had taken the reins of Team 10, and it had been a rough going even from the very beginning. Kiba and Ino had been determinedly frosty toward the jonin, and the man's own aloof attitude, oftentimes a bit robotic, certainly hadn't helped matters. Naruto had been left as the man in the middle, with Kiba and Ino committed to their private rebellion on one side, and Yamato stuck with simple reprimands. Anything more would cause both of the genin to close up even more, that much was obvious to even Naruto, on the other. And, really, short of beating the two of them, which Naruto was loath to do, the boy couldn't really think up a way to get them to stop bitching. A hand blocking his view of the clouds helped him back to the present, and the genin grasped it firmly, letting Yamato pull him into a standing position. He winced slightly at the fresh pain from where the man had kicked him. Now more than ever was he glad for the healing capabilities of the demon fox inside him. Without them, he would have been a bloody mess on the ground, given the number of times both Kiba and Ino had managed to screw up their current exercise. Quite simply, they were instructed to kawarimi with him as he moved in on his opponent, Yamato in this case, in order to sow confusion and take advantage of opportunities created by the first person. It was one of the many teamwork exercises that Yamato had brought to Team 10, and, unfortunately, wasn't being handled well by 2/3 of the team. The only good thing coming out of it was Naruto getting some taijutsu practice against someone other than his clones. The proffered hand disappeared just as suddenly as it had come, and Naruto watched yet another bunshin of his new sensei fade. Blue Eyes found the real man lecturing both Kiba and Ino back where Naruto had started his charge. The concentration is the most crucial part, and it is what you're currently lacking, Yamato said, his tone stern. You've been familiar with the jutsu for years now, so the only thing holding yourself back is your mind. Ino and Kiba both looked less than happy with the criticism, but only Ino spoke. We're not rookies, sensei. We know how the jutsu works. Naruto winced hard. Both Ino and Kiba had been skirting around the edges of disrespect and outright insubordination for the entire 2 weeks Yamato had been their sensei. He'd brushed the majority of it off. The Sandaime probably told him to go easy on them for a while, but most of the two's little rebellion had been far from direct, the words spoken between them and occasionally Naruto, at which point the blonde boy would try, and fail, to impart some form of common sense. This, though, was overt, and Yamato had no reason not to put the two in their place. Is that so? The man questioned. His voice was level and his face as impassive as ever, but Naruto could easily detect the undercurrent of frustration in the jonin. Indeed, if that were the case, you wouldn't have so much trouble with what is by far the simplest of team-based maneuvers in Konoha's playbook. As it stands, only your third teammate seems to be able to manage it. Naruto had never really been one to be awkward, which couldn't really apply to someone who had been an infamous prankster in his younger days, but he couldn't really help it in the face of his teammates' resentful looks. It wasn't his fault he had picked up the technique quickly, months before really, they simply weren't concentrating. Hell, he was the one getting beaten down by their sensei every time Kiba or Ino managed to botch the technique. I wonder at what exactly you were taught previously, if such a simple exercise in a basic jutsu keeps eluding you. The blonde genin bristled at the implied slight against Asuma's teaching, but managed to rein himself in. This was a dressing down long overdue and, no matter how much he liked his teammates, he knew that they needed it. Friction like this needed to be resolved quickly or Team 10 might as well disband, given what their future effectiveness would look like. While Naruto was restrained, his two teammates were not. Our sensei taught us well. Kiba all but screamed, Akamaru adding his own commentary in response to his partner's emotions. Then prove it, Yamato said flatly and so quickly that Naruto almost was forced to crack a smile at trap he had set for Kiba and Ino, though it certainly applied to him as well. If, after this, they continued to make their little rebellion a nuisance, they'd be dishonoring Asuma's memory, slighting all the work he had put into Team 10's growth. It took a few moments for other 2/3 of Team 10 to get the jonin's ploy. They didn't seem all that happy about it, Naruto noted. Yamato sighed, the first real show of emotion the man let slip for the whole day. Naruto noticed that the man became less robotic as the day wore on. The jonin decided to finish ahead for the day, and dismissed the team with a stern note to think on what he had said. Naruto retrieved his pack from where he had tossed it some hours earlier, idly taking out an energy bar and tearing it open. A quick glance at the path that led back to the village showed Kiba and Ino already on their way out. Neither of the two appeared to be in much of a mood to wait for him, to Naruto's chagrin, so he had to hurry to catch up. He threw Yamato a nod on his way past that the jonin didn't bother to return. Drawing level with his team, Naruto listened with less than rapt attention as Ino and Kiba muttered insults of varying potency, shaking his head all the while. Finally, having had enough of both, Naruto interrupted. What the fuck is your problem? The blonde didn't flinch as the hostile looks of earlier returned. They were expected at this point. Undeterred, he continued, we're supposed to be trying to get back to active duty and all you two are doing is fucking around like little kids. Ino looked like she was ready to deck him, but Kiba broke in before the blonde could get a word in edgewise. What's our problem? The fuck's your problem? Asuma-sensei's dead and you're acting like nothing ever happened. And here was the heart of the issue. Asuma. Simple though the answer was, it was nonetheless extremely complex and difficult to deal with. From Naruto's perspective, Asuma had died a hero's death, but it had been of his own making. No one had forced him to stay and wave and fight, but he had chosen to, dragging Team 10 with him into what would and should have been an early grave for all four of them. As much as Naruto would miss the man who had become such a large part of his life, he had to move on. Ino and Kiba had no such thoughts, and only saw the hero's death. Their sensei had died, leaving them to pick up the pieces. Naruto sighed. Yes, he's dead, and I've moved on. Shit doesn't stop happening just because someone dies, and I'm not gonna be stuck flat-footed when it does. Kiba snorted and turned away, but Ino picked up the slack for him. He's been dead for a month and you're already making it seem like he never existed. He was our sensei, not some tool you can throw away, the girl finished, pausing for a moment in the middle to find the right words. I know that dash. Do you? Because it looks like you're having a hard time showing it. But that's not the point. Naruto shouted over Ino's interruption, finally coming to halt with the village in sight just down the path. Yes, he was our sensei. No, he wasn't just some tool. But that doesn't change the fact that he's dead and he would want us to move on. Getting petty about what Yamato tells us to do isn't about to bring him back. So that's it, then? You think you know best so you just go along with what this asshole of replacement says? Naruto had been emotional as a child. From irrational bouts of anger to distasteful pranks on the general populace, the boy had been one of the most openly expressive ninjas in training Konoha had ever seen. Those same emotions had been mostly bottled up in the years following his late-night encounter with Uchiha Itachi, forced aside in favor of a more reserved and calculating persona that was necessary to become a ninja that would ever stand a chance against an organization of mysterious shinobi. But that didn't mean he didn't have those same emotions anymore. People had once been wary of Naruto for more reasons than just his tenant. They said he had a temper. Those people were right, and Naruto wasn't one for what he saw as blatant stupidity in the face of a serious situation. Yeah, I am, because the guy knows what the fuck he's talking about. You're making it seem like Sensei's death was some tragic accident. Well, I've got news for you too, Asuma chose his death. He made a decision that the mission was more important than his and our lives, and paid for it. I'm not about to let the same thing happen to us. Any of us, he added for emphasis, blazing blue eyes boring into the faces of his teammates. Just because you're scared doesn't give you the right to act like nothing happened. Kiba broke in, fully regrouped as Ino sputtered from the slight against Asuma's judgment. I'm not. Shit happened and I'm trying to stop it from happening again. I'm trying to get stronger. You two fucking around, acting like a couple of spoilt brats back in the academy, puts all of us at risk. What happens next time round, and there will be a next time, when shit hits the fan, huh? When the chips are on the fucking table and there's no one there to bail us out? I'll tell you what happens, we die. I'm not about to let that happen, and if that means that I have listened to a guy who's being put in as a replacement for Asuma, and an experienced jonin at that, so be it. Looking back, he shouldn't have expected to have much of an effect on two people as emotional as Kiba and Ino. Neither of them was particularly rational on their best days, nor were they objective on this matter in the slightest. You're a cold bastard, you know that, Naruto? Kiba growled. And you're too idiotic to see reason, Kiba, both of you. I'll live with being cold so long as it keeps people alive. For a moment it looked as if the dog ninja was about to throttle Naruto, who would have welcomed it at this point, but instead did the smartest thing he could and stormed off down the path to the village. Ino followed him without hesitation shortly afterward, but not before tossing Naruto a glare that tried to burn a hole in his face, blonde hair whipping about in the wind. Naruto was left on his own in their wake, standing at the entrance to one of Konoha's many dense, outlying woodlands. Frustration bubbled up in him for a moment before he spun abruptly, channeling chakra into a punch that shattered the trunk of a tree. The sapling tumbled to the ground with a crash as Naruto followed the rapidly disappearing forms of his teammates with his eyes, shaking his head all the while. They would learn he was right. They would have to. / Twin ANBU on the rooftops halted across from one another without a sound. Heads turning in opposite directions, the elite shinobi surveyed the surrounding area with critical eyes. Save for the few forms of late-night walkers or workers, the streets were empty. Konoha was a shinobi village, and as the strongest, it wasn't surprising that foreign agents would do their utmost to infiltrate it. It was at this time, past midnight, that ANBU was in full force in their patrols. Infiltrators were caught weekly, almost daily at times, and every nook and cranny needed to be surveyed. The first, a woman wearing a dog mask, flipped through a quick series of hand seals before nodding. Her partner, a lizard-masked man, nodded back, brining his hands together in a ram seal. A single pulse of chakra, not big enough to disturb any sleeping villagers, emanated from the shinobi, the technique working to unearth anyone hidden in a genjutsu. It had the added effect of rebounding off of surrounding nearby chakra presences, alerting the male ANBU to anyone using natural cover. There was one nearby, but the chakra indicated they were sleeping on the inside of the wall. 5 seconds after the pulse dispersed, the lizard-masked man sent out one more, just to be safe. Satisfied after finding nothing, he gave his female companion a nod. With a whiff of displaced air, the duo vanished into the night, having disturbed no one. Using chakra to cling to the side of the building the two ANBU had just surveyed, positioned on the inner edge of a window, Naruto breathed out in a slow, steady exhale. The blonde, clothed entirely in a blue so dark it could be black, counted out 2 minutes in his head starting from when he heard the two ANBU leave. He was no censor, but two highly trained chakra presences were hard not to notice in a village full of sleeping people. Reaching the 120-second mark, Naruto deftly and silently leveraged himself, gripping the wall with chakra, and flipped onto the roof. Landing in a crouch, body low with his right leg extended in case of any sudden movements, the genin did a quick 360-degree visual check of his surroundings. Finding no one, and mentally congratulating himself for avoiding the patrol, he relaxed for a moment. An easy smile crossed his face, concealed by a half-mask though it was. It was almost fun for Naruto, indulging in what had become one of his guiltiest pleasures. Sneaking past patrols on his way to some late night, or early morning, as it was, training was a bit of a pastime for the blonde. As an academy student, he wasn't given access to the training grounds without special permission, and no one ever seemed willing to give it to him. So he made do, as he always did. True, there was no reason for him to have to sneak past patrols to get in some late-night training. As a genin he had full access to all but the Forest of Death, reserved for Chunin and up, but it helped keep the hard-earned stealth skills sharp. Anyone could be fooled by a good enough cloaking genjutsu or ninjutsu, just like anyone could break a good enough genjutsu. It took real skill to sneak past patrols without using chakra, and it was one of the things that Naruto had taken pride in for years. Knowing where to hide, how to position the body and suppress enough your presence to seem like a chakra presence that was so close to the building's edge as to be inside it, how to move without expending chakra and go undetected in a village full of watchful lookouts, it was things like that counted as real stealth. Asuma had often said that Naruto was born to be an infiltration specialist. The man was right. Taking a moment to feel the wind through his skin-tight mesh shirt, Naruto surveyed his surroundings once more, before silently creeping his way to Training Ground 11. A shunshin would have been quicker, but with how locked down a hidden village was at night, the speed technique was simply a way of asking to get caught. Landing softly in the clearing, Naruto pulled back the blue bandana covering his hair to scratch his head before replacing it with a blue hoodie, shinobi grade, from one of his storage scrolls. Tight-fitting clothing was a must when sneaking around, as loose garments flapping in the wind were a dead giveaway to any observant patrols. Fully covered from head to toe in blue, Naruto brought his hands together in a cross-shaped seal. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, he murmured. 12 puffs of smoke heralded the arrival of his clones, each clad in the same clothing as he. A single nod greeted the doppelgangers, and they each moved into the nearby trees, disappearing from the original sight. Back in the clearing, Naruto centered himself, calling up the numerous lectures on his taijutsu Yamato had given him, as well as the hours of practice he had gone through with his clones. Taking a deep breath, Naruto drew his former sensei's trademark knuckle knives and made his way into the trees, tensed in anticipation for the rustlings in the dark.
That's it for today. Remember to show your support to the creator of this story if you enjoyed it. If you would like more parts of the story to be uploaded, leave a comment and subscribe to get notified when the story continues. Bye-bye for now, and I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of your day.